Welcome everyone, I'm Argulax, and today we're going to be taking a look at a Jeskai Flash list that Kyle Bogamus, Pro Tour finalist Kyle Bogamus, played to a top 16 finish at the last SCG Tour stop in Columbus. So, Jeskai Flash has kind of bled into Jeskai Control over the history of Modern, but this is a true Jeskai Flash mid-range, tempo-ish, aggro-ish list. I've kind of split it up into threats, removal, and blue magic, and you can see there's a ton of threats in this list. So the big card that's kind of the gain is Spell Queller that Thomas Strong finished top 8 at the last USWMCQ, also playing a Jeskai Flash list with Spell Quellers. But just the additional counter magic plus threat slot is really huge in this deck. Even if it is a bit of a liability in mid-range mirror sometimes if you play it wrong, and it ends up being kind of a mediocre threat in those matchups. It's still a great card most of the time, especially in such a combo-dominated format. Snapcaster Mage obvious, Vendilion Clique pretty obvious, lots of Restoration Angel quite obvious. Then we got some Blade Splicers. This card plays kind of an important role. Having a colorless golem lets you block Etch Champion out of Affinity. It's also just a good threat to cycle with Restoration Angel and kind of clogs up the ground and does some cool stuff. It's not the greatest card, but it does some work in a pinch. We've got pretty standard removal base, Bolts, Helixes, Pass, no Electrolyzes, worth noting. The drop in Affinity kind of caused some of that, and Spell Queller can pick up the slack against like Infect or similar decks where it just kind of counters something pretty easily. It's Electrolyze is kind of narrow in what it does. There's also, some of these lists have some weird one-of removal spells, just the solid stock stuff. Moving to the blue magic stack, for Serum Vision's basically best card in the format for this archetype. Really just defines what the blue decks in the format do. Smattering of counter magic, and not a lot of go along. You are a tempo deck. You are kind of spell quelling their spell and trying to beat them down. So the thing I will note here is that there are no soft counters, no mana leaks. They're just spell snares, negates, cryptic commands, cards that actually trade for a card, which is something I'm pretty happy with in this list. Mana leak getting dead going late is pretty awkward. There's also spots where, because you have negates, you can line up a spell queller in the mid game with protection that's guaranteed to counter the removal spell, especially if the removal spell is like a bolt or a path. Lands, we have a pretty standard fetch dual mana base. Pretty stock for this kind of archetype. Worth noting there's 3 islands, so you can get to Cryptic Command through a Blood Moon. And then you have the other non-basics. Multiple Glacial Fortresses is Painless Blue-White. 4 of the best, best or second best, depending on how you measure, of the old World-Weight Creature lands. Just 4 of, and then a Ghost Quarter for some marginal value, though this list is pretty bad against the decks that Ghost Quarter is great against. Still having a land that can trade for an Inkmoth Nexus is nice. Or an Eldrazi Temple or a Cavern of Souls. Looking at the sideboard, again, we have 2 stacks. Typically you see like spot answers and then like permanent-ish hate cards. This deck's a little light on the true hate, but you've got this blue magic stack of more counter spells, 1 Spell Pierce because you do want a cheaper way to interact with certain cards that are sorceries. Just 1 drawing multiples is kind of stinky. Then some Ancestral Vision to overpower the green-black decks where necessary. There's a Rest in Peace and a Grafdigger's Cage to kind of hedge against Dredge. Also, Rune Halo is pretty reasonable. You can shut down some of the recursive threats with it. It also KOs the Valakut decks by naming Valakut. Just all in all, this card's really powerful and generally underplayed. We've got some more Blade Splicers to gum up the ground where necessary. And then Izzet Staticaster against the various X1 creature decks. So, I think relative to other instances of this archetype, the sideboard is light on true hate, especially because Stony Silence has kind of fallen out of the metagame, or specifically decks that you need to Stony Silence have fallen out of the metagame. But overall, this deck, besides the lack of hate cards, is pretty much just the stock best cards for this archetype, plus Blade Splicers. You aren't trying to do anything fancy. You're just trying to make sure their spells get countered, make sure their creatures die, and then make sure they die in various ways. And I kind of want to try this more straightforward approach because I think that one of the issues traditionally with Jeskai, as I mentioned in an article, is just the blue decks in general is what I attribute it to, is this conditionality of their answers because people can play around certain counter spells position And if you just give them the least number of opportunities to do that by playing hard counters, I think that's a big step in the right direction.